The stars above Earth had never seemed so silent, so still. The Zithar fleet entered the solar system like a storm, a harbinger of doom, and humanity watched, powerless, as their worst fears became a reality. These were no ordinary invaders. The Zithar were known throughout the galaxy as a species of ruthless conquerors, their weapons capable of annihilating entire cities with a single strike. With their massive ships and overwhelming firepower, they had razed countless worlds, leaving nothing but ash and ruin in their wake. Earth, with its primitive defenses and limited resources, didn't stand a chance. The first signs of the invasion came through a warning from the Lunar Observatory, a flash of light too bright to be any ordinary celestial event. The telescopes confirmed it. A fleet of enormous ships had appeared on the far edge of the solar system. Calculations showed that they were headed straight for Earth. The military immediately mobilized. The United Earth Defense Alliance, UEDA, a coalition of the world's strongest armies, began coordinating their forces. Even as they prepared their most advanced weapons, there was an undercurrent of disbelief. For the first time in history, humanity's greatest minds and leaders couldn't offer a solution. The Zithar's weapons were beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Shields impervious to nuclear blasts, laser cannons that vaporized anything they touched, ships that moved faster than light. The best weapons Earth had to offer, developed over decades of scientific breakthroughs, were laughably inadequate in the face of such a technologically superior foe. The people of Earth went into a state of collective shock. Governments issued orders to begin evacuating major cities, but the sense of hopelessness was overwhelming. The media broadcasted live coverage of the fleet's approach, and it wasn't long before the world realized this was not just an invasion. It was an extinction event. Then, the Zithar made their move. Massive warships descended into Earth's atmosphere, slowly and deliberately. The sky turned dark as these enormous ships blotted out the sun. The first salvo struck, an explosion that wiped out half of New York City, leaving a crater where once stood one of the world's busiest metropolises. The destruction was instantaneous. In a matter of minutes, entire populations were wiped from existence. It was clear the Zithar weren't here for negotiation. They were here to conquer and destroy. Panic spread across the globe. With every passing hour, the Zithar expanded their foothold. Their forces, like a tide of ruthless machines, began sweeping through major cities around the world. They sent down automated drones and terrifying ground soldiers to secure strategic locations. Major world capitals fell first: London, Paris, Beijing. The world's military forces responded as best they could, but the results were predictable. Each attempt to fight back was swiftly crushed. For every human fighter that took a stand, 100 more fell. The battle seemed hopeless, and soon it became clear that the war wasn't about whether humanity would win, but whether it would survive. Yet, amid the devastation, something unexpected was stirring. A handful of humans, civilians mostly, began to resist, not with grand weapons or sophisticated technology, but with pure will. The Zithar had underestimated Earth's people. They were expecting a world of people paralyzed by fear, easily crushed under the weight of overwhelming power. What they didn't account for was the unyielding fire within humanity's heart. A small group of soldiers, now relegated to hiding in the mountains and forests, began to organize. They weren't generals or military commanders, but ordinary men and women who had been pushed to their limits. Some were former police officers, others ex-military, and a few were just everyday civilians with a deep love for their home. They were determined to fight for survival, not with the advanced weapons the Zithar mocked, but with whatever they could scrounge from the wreckage of their cities. They set traps, sabotaged enemy drones, and launched guerrilla raids against Zithar outposts. The tactics they employed weren't anything new, but they were brutal and efficient. The Zithar were caught off guard. Earth's warriors weren't fighting for conquest. They were fighting for their lives, and there was no more dangerous force in the galaxy than a species that had nothing left to lose. The Zithar had assumed that Earth's technological inferiority would lead to an easy victory, but they hadn't accounted for the human spirit. The first encounter where Earth's fighters managed to outmaneuver their alien counterparts sent a shockwave through the Zithar ranks. Their commanders couldn't believe it. It was a small victory, a skirmish barely worthy of notice, but it sent a message. Humanity wasn't going to go down without a fight. And that, as the Zithar would soon discover, would be their greatest mistake. As the Zithar's forces continued their brutal assault, humanity's defenses crumbled. Every attempt to deploy advanced weaponry against the invaders fell short. The most powerful missiles, designed to obliterate entire fleets, disintegrated upon impact with the Zithar shields. Nuclear warheads, once thought to be the ultimate deterrent, had no effect whatsoever. In the early days of the invasion, Earth's greatest military minds were left in a state of stunned disbelief, watching as their best technologies were reduced to mere sparks against the alien juggernaut. Cities fell in mere hours, their populations decimated by the overwhelming firepower the Zithar unleashed from above. Once thriving urban centers were reduced to smoldering craters, leaving behind only ghost towns and scattered debris. The military command centers in major nations were destroyed in precision strikes, and communication with military outposts became sporadic. Earth's forces, even when coordinated, were no match for the speed and power of the Zithar. It wasn't just the military that felt the weight of defeat. The entire world seemed to lose hope. The United Earth Defense Alliance, UEDA, scrambled for answers, poring over data, but their efforts amounted to nothing. Every tactic, every strategy, fell apart in the face of an invincible enemy. The Zithar ships, beyond any technology humanity had ever encountered, seemed impervious to all forms of attack. But just when it seemed the situation couldn't get worse, a different kind of resistance began to emerge. Small pockets of survivors, scattered across the globe, began to organize, not through military command, but through sheer necessity and ingenuity. It wasn't the generals or political leaders who started fighting back. It was ordinary people, those who had nothing but their will to survive. They weren't concerned with technological superiority. They had nothing but their minds, their hearts, and the instinct to defend their families and homes. Among the rubble of the fallen cities, groups of survivors gathered. They didn't have advanced weapons. What they had was something more primal: resourcefulness. The ruins of their destroyed cities became their battlegrounds. They learned how to turn scraps of metal, spare parts, and even everyday objects into tools of resistance. Where the Zithar expected nothing, they found a fierce, relentless fight. Earth's resistance fighters didn't just engage in guerrilla warfare, they adapted. In places like the dense forests of North America, survivors used the terrain to their advantage, setting traps for Zithar patrols. In Europe, former soldiers who had once served in smaller armies launched surprise ambushes using guerrilla tactics that hadn't been seen since the Great World Wars. They used everything around them to their advantage: knowledge of the land, local resources, and the element of surprise. One of the first successful attacks came when a small band of survivors sabotaged a Zithar supply line. It wasn't a grand victory. It wasn't even a battle. But it was enough. A few Zithar soldiers were killed, and their equipment, vital to the alien operation, was destroyed. The attack sent a ripple of hope through the survivors. They had proven that they could hurt the invaders. In the cities, small resistance groups took to the rooftops, using sniping tactics and handmade explosive devices to harass the Zithar forces. Though primitive compared to the Zithar's laser-guided weapons, these human-made devices proved surprisingly effective when used with cunning and precision. As the Zithar began to encounter more and more of these ambushes, they started to realize that humanity wasn't simply accepting their destruction. The resistance wasn't organized, nor was it armed with advanced weapons, but it was persistent. It adapted. It fought back. Word spread across the globe. A resistance movement was taking shape, not just military forces, but regular civilians, doctors, teachers, farmers, and even children. They joined together in the shadows, uniting for a single cause: survival. And despite the advanced technology of the Zithar, it became clear that the alien invaders had severely underestimated one thing: human tenacity. The Zithar were accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force. They believed that their superior technology would break Earth's spirit quickly. Instead, they found themselves caught in a war of attrition, a war fought by humans with nothing but their resourcefulness and their willpower. Earth wasn't crumbling under the weight of the Zithar. They were fighting back, and they were doing it in ways that no alien invader had ever expected. And the more the Zithar tried to stomp out humanity's resistance, the more they realized that they had sparked something in the human race, a fire they couldn't extinguish. The weapons they feared so much, those that Earth had created, had failed to deliver victory. But Earth had something else that no invader could ever take away: the will to fight. The days that followed the first successes of Earth's resistance were both a time of desperation and revelation. Across the world, a sense of unity began to take root. What started as scattered, independent pockets of survivalists soon coalesced into something much more formidable. No longer isolated by geography or politics, people of every nation came together under one banner: the survival of humanity. Governments, once fractured and slow to react, were no longer in charge. The people, everyday citizens with no military training, were becoming the heart of the war effort. It wasn't just the urban areas that were resisting the Zithar anymore. Rural regions, once thought irrelevant by the alien invaders, began to offer unexpected resistance. The forests of Canada became a hideout for a growing army of freedom fighters, where people who had once been farmers and hunters now turned their skills into survival tools. The harsh, unforgiving landscapes of the Siberian tundra became the domain of saboteurs who expertly tracked and ambushed any Zithar patrols that ventured too far from their command posts. The Amazon jungle, its dense canopy an impenetrable fortress for the humans, became a perfect place for setting traps that even Zithar drones couldn't anticipate. Humanity, desperate and outmatched, had learned quickly that victory didn't lie in brute force, but in cunning, endurance, and ingenuity. One such group of resistance fighters, led by a former military strategist named John Reyes, had been responsible for some of the first major setbacks the Zithar suffered. Their unit had been formed by civilians, a ragtag bunch of ex-soldiers, engineers, and even a handful of scientists, each offering their unique expertise to the cause. But it wasn't their knowledge that had made them effective. It was their refusal to accept defeat. Reyes had once been an expert in psychological warfare, and his first priority was instilling a sense of defiance in his comrades. The Zithar had come expecting Earth to bend under their heel. They expected fear, panic, and submission. Instead, Reyes and his team set out to show the Zithar just how resilient humans could be. The first success came when they infiltrated a Zithar supply base in the heart of South America. Armed with nothing more than basic explosives and homemade incendiary devices, the team struck in the dead of night. The attack, although small in scale, destroyed critical Zithar weaponry and caused a chain reaction that set off a massive firestorm in the base. Zithar patrols, unprepared for human tactics that made no sense by their standards, were disoriented, and their communication systems were thrown into disarray. For the first time, the invaders were forced to deal with a problem they didn't know how to solve: human unpredictability. In the aftermath of this operation, word began to spread. The Zithar were stunned. The quiet, insignificant humans they had dismissed as primitive were capable of outwitting their superior technology. And this was only one example of the growing human resistance. As Reyes's unit and others like it carried out successful strikes, the Zithar began to realize something they had not expected. Humans weren't just surviving. They were learning, adapting, and evolving in ways their alien technology couldn't predict. In places like the Middle East, where ancient cultures still thrived in remote cities, Small teams of resistance fighters began using the centuries-old tunnels and fortresses to launch guerrilla strikes against Zithar patrols. These fighters were outnumbered and outgunned, but their knowledge of the terrain, combined with their steely resolve, allowed them to execute surprise ambushes with terrifying precision. They used the age-old tactics of hit-and-run warfare, making it clear that while the Zithar might control the skies, Earth still owned the ground. In Europe, a different form of resistance began to emerge. A group of former scientists, engineers, and inventors had banded together to create makeshift weapons and tools from the wreckage of Zithar technology and human technology alike. They had no military-grade weapons, but they knew how to repurpose technology. They hacked Zithar drones, turning them against their creators, and used scraps of Zithar ship parts to build crude yet effective countermeasures. What they lacked in firepower, they made up for in ingenuity. The Zithar, caught off guard by these growing human tactics, began to falter. Their reliance on overwhelming firepower had worked in the beginning because they had underestimated humanity's capacity for resistance. But as they pushed deeper into the heart of Earth, they found that the human spirit was the one thing they had no weapon against. In secret underground bunkers, human strategists, many of whom were civilians just months before the invasion, began coordinating larger-scale operations. They sent out scouts to gather intelligence, using stealth and speed to gain crucial data on Zithar movements. Every small success fed into a growing resistance network that spanned the globe. Humanity's fight was no longer about hiding in the shadows. It was about reclaiming their planet, piece by piece. And as Earth's warriors began to find new strength in their unity, the Zithar's once unshakable confidence started to waver. Humanity was no longer simply surviving. It was fighting back in ways no alien army had ever expected. The war was no longer a one-sided slaughter. It had become a battle for survival, a battle where every human, no matter their background, could contribute to the effort. And with every small victory, Earth's warriors grew bolder, their resolve stronger. The Zithar had not anticipated this kind of fight, and now they were starting to learn that the true power of humanity wasn't in its weapons, it was in its heart. The Zithar had underestimated the human spirit, but they also understood that sometimes, in the face of an unpredictable enemy, decisive action was required. Their arrogance had been shaken, but they were determined to finish what they had started. As Earth's resistance groups continued to harass them with increasingly sophisticated tactics, the Zithar commanders began to devise a new strategy, one designed to break human morale once and for all. They would demonstrate their superiority, not just in battle, but in the arena of honor. The Zithar were a warrior species, and to them, combat was not simply about domination, it was about proving superiority. They sent a transmission to Earth's remaining leaders, a message that would echo across the globe. We are the Zithar. You have fought well, but your strength is nothing compared to ours. We offer you a challenge, a duel. One human champion, chosen by your people, will face our greatest warrior. If your champion wins, we will spare one of your cities. If he or she loses, we will obliterate it. This is our final offer. Choose wisely. The audacity of the challenge stunned the world. Leaders and military commanders scrambled for answers. A direct response was impossible. No human could possibly defeat a Zithar warrior in hand-to-hand combat. At least, that was the assumption. Yet, even as fear gripped the hearts of those who received the message, something else stirred deep within humanity. This was an opportunity to show the invaders that Earth would not bow. For days, the global networks buzzed with uncertainty. Military analysts and strategists debated, but ultimately, it was a different voice that spoke the loudest. It was a woman named Maya Solis, a former Olympic athlete and soldier who had seen the worst of the war, but had never lost her belief in humanity's ability to rise above any challenge. Maya had been a champion in her sport, but she had never fought for her life. Until now. The moment Maya's name was announced as humanity's champion, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Maya had trained her whole life to compete, to push herself to the limits of human strength, speed, and endurance. But this was not an athletic competition. This was a battle to the death, a test of pure willpower. Even her fellow resistance fighters, who had known her for years, doubted that she could possibly survive against the Zithar's overwhelming power. But Maya did not fear them. She was not fighting for herself. She was fighting for Earth. The duel would take place in a stadium-like arena, a giant structure erected by the Zithar in the heart of a destroyed city. It was designed to showcase their might, a place where they could display their invincibility. The arena, surrounded by the alien forces, was a massive open pit with walls that seemed to shimmer under the harsh light of the Zithar ships hovering overhead. The air was thick with tension, and the world's eyes were fixed on the battle that was about to unfold. As Maya entered the arena, the Zithar's champion stepped forward. The alien warrior was imposing, a towering figure clad in gleaming, multi-layered armor, their eyes glowing with a cold, calculating malice. The Zithar warrior species had been bred for combat, each individual genetically enhanced to be a near-perfect killer. He was faster, stronger, and tougher than any human could ever hope to be. And yet, as the two stood face to face, Maya's resolve never wavered. The fight began without warning. The Zithar champion charged, moving with a speed and ferocity that took even the human observers by surprise. His movements were a blur, an expert display of alien combat techniques designed to overwhelm his opponent in the blink of an eye. Maya, however, was ready. She dodged his first strike, narrowly avoiding the massive blade that sliced through the air, where she had been just a second before. The crowd of Zithar soldiers roared in approval, believing that the human champion was already doomed. But Maya's years of training had prepared her for this moment. Her agility, her precision, and her strength were beyond what most humans could ever imagine. She knew how to read her opponent, how to anticipate his next move. The Zithar champion was quick, but Maya was quicker. She wasn't trying to overpower him. She was trying to outsmart him. The fight raged on, a brutal contest of skill, speed, and strategy. The Zithar champion's strikes were heavy and powerful, but Maya's movements were fluid, her reflexes honed by years of training in sports where split-second decisions meant victory or defeat. Each time the alien warrior's blade came close, she was there, moving just out of reach, always a step ahead. In a pivotal moment, the Zithar champion, overconfident and enraged by his inability to land a decisive blow, made a critical mistake. He overextended himself, swinging wildly in an attempt to land a finishing strike. Maya seized the opportunity. With a precise, calculated move, she dodged his attack and launched herself forward, striking his exposed flank with a blow that stunned the alien warrior. The crowd went silent as the Zithar staggered, momentarily thrown off balance. Maya didn't hesitate. She pressed her advantage, attacking with a series of calculated, brutal strikes that targeted the weak points in the Zithar armor. The alien champion, for the first time, was on the defensive. He had underestimated his opponent, and as the final blow was struck, a crack in his armor revealed the vulnerable point beneath. Maya's fist landed squarely, and the Zithar warrior fell. The stadium erupted into chaos. The Zithar forces were stunned, their arrogance shattered. The human champion had done the impossible. Against all odds, Maya Solis had defeated their greatest warrior. The Zithar were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered pride, realizing that humanity's true strength wasn't in its weapons, but in its warriors, and in the unbreakable will to fight for survival. Maya's victory sent shockwaves through both human and Zithar ranks, altering the course of the war in ways neither side could have anticipated. For the first time since the invasion began, the Zithar were not the ones who controlled the narrative. The victory in the arena had given humanity something invaluable: hope. What had seemed like an inevitable extinction now appeared to be a battle that could be won. People who had been hiding in bunkers, preparing for their final days, now stood a little taller. The resistance fighters, scattered and demoralized, found renewed purpose in the wake of Maya's triumph. The Zithar, however, were not so easily deterred. Their pride, shattered by one human woman's strength, burned hotter than their hatred. They had expected submission, fear, and compliance. Instead, they were faced with a humanity that was emboldened by the slightest glimpse of victory. The defeat of their greatest warrior was not just a symbolic loss. It was a direct challenge to everything they had believed about their invincibility. But the Zithar were strategic. Their commanders understood that one loss, no matter how devastating, was not enough to tip the balance of the war. They quickly regrouped and set in motion a new plan, one that would push humanity to its breaking point. At the same time, Earth's resistance was not content to rest on the laurels of one victory. Maya's win had proven that the human spirit was their greatest weapon, but the fight was far from over. The victory in the arena had bought them a small window of time. Time to organize, time to plan, and time to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. The world's leaders, despite their earlier helplessness, now began to work together more cohesively. The once fragmented resistance groups were becoming a unified force, pulling together fighters from all corners of the globe. John Reyes, the strategist who had helped lead many of the early victories, was now placed in a position of authority. He had always believed in humanity's ability to adapt and survive, but now he saw that the key to victory was more than just guerrilla tactics. It was the collective will to succeed. He began coordinating attacks that would spread the Zithar forces thinner across Earth's surface, forcing them to stretch their resources to the breaking point. The Zithar response came swiftly. They launched a devastating counteroffensive, one that was designed to crush the new hope that had sparked among the human population. They brought out their full arsenal, waves of warships that blotted out the sky, legions of ground soldiers, and a new class of devastating energy weapons that had been kept in reserve. They unleashed their full fury on Earth's remaining major cities, targeting military strongholds, resistance camps, and the newly established hubs of human coordination. Every success the humans had gained was met with brutal retaliation. The resistance, however, wasn't blind to this. They had learned to fight with limited resources, to hide in plain sight, and to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. Instead of retreating, they used the Zithar's own weapons against them. Disguised as simple civilian convoys, they infiltrated Zithar supply chains, sabotaging critical infrastructure. Drones, which had once been the Zithar's ultimate weapon, were now reprogrammed and turned against their creators, becoming a nightmare that the Zithar could no longer control. In Africa, where human fighters had relied on local wildlife to aid in their tactics, the Zithar found themselves in a strange and unexpected situation. Elephants and rhinoceroses, armed with makeshift armor and repurposed weapons, charged into Zithar positions, creating chaos and forcing the invaders to retreat. The symbolism of animals fighting alongside humans was not lost on either side. It was a visual reminder that the world was no longer theirs to conquer. It was Earth's, and its defenders were as varied and unpredictable as the planet itself. Even in the heart of the devastated cities, where nothing but rubble remained, humanity continued to fight. Former doctors and engineers, now makeshift combatants, had repurposed abandoned vehicles into armored convoys, raiding Zithar supply lines in the dead of night. They had no illusions of defeating the invaders outright. They were playing for time, disrupting Zithar operations, and preventing their full occupation of the planet. Despite the Zithar's technological superiority, their numbers had begun to dwindle. The supply chains they had relied upon to maintain their forces were becoming increasingly fragmented. Earth's resistance, driven by the fire of survival, continued to outpace them. But the Zithar were far from defeated. They were regrouping for one final push. They had underestimated the tenacity of humanity once before, but now they were preparing to squash any last remnants of defiance in a single, overwhelming assault. In the midst of this chaos, Maya Solis remained a symbol of hope. Though she had fought her battle and won, she knew that the war was far from over. The Zithar had learned from their mistakes, and soon they would bring their full force to bear. Maya would have to prepare for what was coming next. But she wasn't alone anymore. The world's people were united in a way they had never been before. Every victory, every small success, added to the collective strength of humanity. And though the Zithar still controlled the skies, Earth had begun to reclaim its ground. The Zithar had challenged humanity, and now they would learn that humans fought not for honor, not for pride, but for survival. And Earth's warriors would make sure the invaders never forgot that. The Zithar called it Operation Final Cleansing. Their fleets, now bruised and humiliated, descended with renewed fury, darkening the skies with warships the size of cities. Their goal was simple: to crush Earth's resistance once and for all by targeting the very heart of human coordination, the hidden resistance command center known only as the Core. Buried deep beneath the ruins of the Swiss Alps, the Core was more than a bunker. It was humanity's brain. It coordinated the global resistance through encrypted satellite relays and underground communication lines. There, military tacticians, scientists, and former world leaders worked side by side with mechanics, hackers, and survivors. It wasn't a fortress, it was a nerve center, and the Zithar had found it. Their precision strike came swiftly. A wave of orbital plasma beams scorched the mountain slopes, turning snow to steam and rock to slag. Entire peaks collapsed, burying villages and outposts. The ground shook as hundreds of drop pods slammed into the terrain, unleashing the Zithar's elite assault forces. This was no probing raid. This was annihilation. Inside the Core, John Reyes stood before a tactical hologram, eyes scanning lines of red as they closed in from every direction. He didn't flinch. "They're throwing everything at us," he muttered. "They're desperate." Beside him, Maya Solis fastened the straps on her battle armor. Since the arena duel, she'd become more than a symbol. She was a leader, a warrior whose mere presence ignited courage. She knew the Zithar wouldn't stop until they had burned Earth clean. And now, the war had come to her doorstep. Reyes turned to her. "We need to evacuate the Core. If they take it, we lose coordination. We go blind." Maya shook her head. "No, if we run now, we scatter. We lose everything we've built. We hold the line here." Outside, the battle erupted in full. Resistance fighters poured from underground bunkers and tunnels, wielding weapons cobbled together from human scrap and Zithar tech. Auto turrets came to life, chattering with rapid fire as the first wave of Zithar soldiers approached through the smoke. Explosions lit the mountainside like fireworks as Earth's warriors fought with the ferocity of cornered beasts. The Zithar had expected resistance, but they hadn't expected coordination. Drones hacked weeks before were now unleashed in swarms, crashing into Zithar walkers with explosive payloads. Sniper nests hidden in the cliffs picked off high-ranking officers. Traps buried in the snow detonated with ear-shattering fury. For every human who fell, two more stood to take their place. Inside the Core, Reyes coordinated units like a maestro conducting an orchestra of chaos. His voice echoed through every communicator across the globe. "They've hit the Core. If we fall together. Push them back, wherever you are. Let them feel the weight of the world." The call was answered with fury. From the ruined streets of Shanghai to the scorched plains of Texas, resistance groups launched simultaneous offensives. It was madness. Brutal, uncoordinated madness. But it worked. The Zithar, stretched thin by their focus on the Core, found themselves overwhelmed across multiple fronts. Back in the Alps, the tide began to turn. Maya led a strike team through a breached tunnel, cutting through Zithar forces with brutal efficiency. She moved like a phantom, her body fueled by adrenaline and sheer will. Her team reached the central breach where a Zithar assault captain was planting a seismic bomb meant to collapse the entire command structure. Maya charged. The two clashed in a blur of motion, metal against flesh, energy blade against salvaged human steel. The Zithar captain was stronger, faster, but he wasn't prepared for Maya's rage. She remembered every ruined city, every screaming child, every friend buried under rubble. With a roar, she drove her blade into the alien's chest, twisted, and kicked him back into the bomb. Sparks flew. The device detonated prematurely. Outside the structure, the mountain shook, but the core held. By dawn, the Zithar retreated, their elite forces decimated. Their plan failed. The core still stood, Earth still fought, and humanity's warriors, bloody, battered, unbroken, remained defiant. The failure of the Zithar assault on the core had repercussions far beyond Earth's mountains. What was meant to be a crushing final blow became a symbol of resistance that echoed across galaxies. Other alien civilizations, once too afraid to speak against the Zithar, began to take notice. Whispers spread through the stars. The humans are winning. But Earth's warriors knew better. They had not won the war, only a moment of breathing room. The Zithar were wounded, but not broken. And with their pride now fractured beyond repair, they prepared something far worse than another siege. They intended to poison the Earth itself. High above the planet, in the vast black of space, the Zithar flagship Oblivion Core stirred to life. It was not a warship in the conventional sense. It was a world killer, a relic from an older conquest. It housed a terraforming weapon designed to wipe all biological life and repopulate the surface with Zithar-compatible ecosystems. The plan was no longer subjugation. It was erasure. Back on Earth, Maya Solis and John Reyes were already preparing for what came next. Intercepted communications revealed fragments of the plan. No one knew the full details, but the term planet reset appeared too many times to ignore. In the depths of the reclaimed core, a secret division called Ghost Cell began work on Earth's most ambitious counterattack yet. Made up of hackers, former space engineers, and rogue physicists, the team had a simple goal: steal a Zithar ship capable of reaching Oblivion Core and destroy it from within. Reyes oversaw the operation from the ground, but Maya, despite objections, volunteered to lead the infiltration unit. She would pilot the stolen vessel herself. "You've already done enough," Reyes argued. "You don't have to be the face of every impossible mission." Maya shook her head, eyes fixed on the stars. "I'm not the face. I'm the tip of the spear. If we don't stop that ship, nothing else will matter. All our victories will turn to ash." So the plan began. Under the cover of a global counteroffensive, a small team of elite fighters and engineers struck a remote Zithar hangar in orbit over the South Pacific. Using experimental stealth gear scavenged from broken drones, they infiltrated the installation, taking the alien garrison by surprise. The operation was fast and brutal. 6 humans against dozens of Zithar, each one outmatching them in strength and speed. But the humans had something more dangerous than muscle. They had purpose. By the time the Zithar sounded a distress beacon, Maya's team had already seized a mid-range interceptor. They launched within minutes, pushing the stolen ship toward Oblivion Core using a hacked navigation AI rigged together from old Earth software and modified alien tech. The journey to the flagship was harrowing. They flew blind through asteroid fields and dodged defense grids that weren't designed to miss. But Ghost Cell's tech held firm. For the first time in the war, humans had broken into the Zithar's territory, their domain. Inside the flagship, things were worse than they feared. Maya and her squad emerged into a biomechanical nightmare. The interior of Oblivion Core pulsed with alien life. Walls made of organic material, glowing with toxic spores and strange fluids. It wasn't just a ship, it was alive. And at its heart, they found the weapon. A vast organic reactor pulsing with green light, its energy signature already charging toward release. Time was limited. The team split. While the engineers worked to disable the reactor's failsafes, Maya and the others held back waves of Zithar security drones and mutated biotroopers. They fought without retreat, without hesitation, every shot fired buying another second for Earth. In the final moments, as the countdown neared 0, Reyes's voice came through the comms. "Maya, the reactor's destabilizing. If you don't get out now, "We're not leaving," she said. "If this thing escapes, there won't be a next time." She turned to her team. No one flinched. Not one took a step back. As the weapon reached critical mass, Maya looked out through the ship's viewport. Earth shimmered far below, scared, battered, beautiful. She smiled. "Tell them we did it." The line went dead. A flash lit the dark side of Earth's sky. The flagship, Oblivion Core, was gone. And with it, Earth's last, greatest threat. In that moment, every corner of Earth, from the underground bunkers to the broken cities, erupted in cheers. Humanity had struck back. And it wasn't their weapons the galaxy feared now. It was their warriors. The destruction of Oblivion Core marked a turning point in the war. No, in history. The Zithar Empire, long the uncontested force of terror across countless worlds, had been wounded in a way they had never imagined possible. They had lost not just a weapon or a battle, they had lost the illusion of invincibility. But Earth's victory came at a cost. Maya Solis and her team were gone. Heroes whose final act had saved a world, but whose sacrifice left a silence that echoed deeper than any cheer. Across every resistance outpost, every camp and hidden base, her name became a whisper, a prayer, a rallying cry. Children learned it before their own. Fighters etched it into their armor. "Tell them we did it." The phrase spread like wildfire. It became more than her last words. It became humanity's war creed. Still, the war was not yet over. Though shaken, the Zithar were not defeated. Their forces remained scattered across Earth, clinging to fractured strongholds, uncertain of their orders. With their leadership dead aboard Oblivion Core and their supply chains shattered, they had no unified command. But that made them dangerous. Feral, enraged, unpredictable. John Rays understood this better than anyone. In the days following the flagship's destruction, he spearheaded the largest coordinated campaign Earth had ever mounted. It was called Operation Reclamation, a global effort to sweep the planet clean of every last Zithar outpost. The resistance, now an army in truth, rose up in force. For the first time, humans went on the offensive at full scale. In South America, airships salvaged from Zithar wreckage rained fire on jungle hideouts. In Europe, old cities were reborn as command hubs, pushing troops into the remnants of Zithar-occupied zones. African resistance groups used mobile desert convoys to encircle and trap alien warlords. Even Antarctica, once written off as a frozen wasteland, became a strategic staging ground, its underground labs now repurposed for tactical operations. But perhaps the most powerful weapon Earth wielded was no longer material. It was reputation. Word of humanity's defiance had traveled, and with it came something Earth had never expected: allies. Other species, long suppressed or hiding in the corners of the galaxy, began sending signals. Some offered intelligence, others weapon blueprints. One race, the Aural, once enslaved by the Zithar, offered their ancient quantum tech to Ryas directly, in gratitude for what humanity had proven, that the mighty could bleed. With the Aural's tech, Ryas launched Earth's first interstellar broadcast, a message not of conquest, but of warning. "To the Zithar remnants," he said, standing in the shadow of a shattered cruiser, "you came here thinking we were weak, that we would kneel. You feared our weapons, until you met our warriors. We are not your prey. We are your reckoning. Leave our world, or be buried in it." Some Zithar commanders chose retreat. They abandoned their posts, fleeing into orbit or slipping away in cloaked transports. Others, too proud or too broken to run, fought to the bitter end. Earth gave no quarter, not out of cruelty, but out of resolve. There would be no more invasions, no more mercy for monsters who had scorched their skies. Within 6 months, Earth was theirs again. Not whole, not unscarred, but free. The rebuilding began slowly. Fields were cleared, cities rebuilt. Old nations forged new treaties, not out of politics, but survival. Humanity, once fractured by borders and ideology, now stood united by fire. And through it all, Maya's legacy endured. A statue was erected in what had once been Geneva. It showed Maya as she was in her final moments, standing, defiant, eyes to the stars. At its base, a simple inscription. They came to conquer. We answered with warriors. And they will never forget us. The war was over, but humanity had changed forever. Not just survivors, not just fighters, but legends.